Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where late Friday, less than a week after Tim Miller very publicly, abruptly, and shockingly left Deadpool 2, it would seem that Fox is zeroing in, Fox and Ryan Reynolds are zeroing in on a replacement. And one of you even tweeted me this story, Cherik X Life on Twitter, and said, "That was fast," to which I replied, they're trying to shut down that negative spin. Nobody likes to have anything negative associated with their film, particularly the sequel to a very lucrative first film, and so they do not want negative buzz, particularly that casts a bad light on Ryan Reynolds or makes people feel the second movie might not be as good, to really take hold, right? Like, remember how hard Disney worked to talk down the Rogue One reshoots story, right? They were like, yeah, we're reshooting most of the movie, but it's a good thing. And so they're trying to make everybody feel that there is somebody very strong taking over behind the camera for Deadpool 2 now that Tim Miller is adrift. I think also it'll be a big blow. The other shoe will drop when Tim Miller signs on to another project. He might indeed stay at Fox as intended with another trilogy or whatever a franchise they want him to spearhead, but I would imagine that Tim Miller's probably a little bit upset about how things have gone down, and he's had to leave the franchise that he helped create, Deadpool. So I would think that he would be looking to have the other shoe drop, potentially, I'm hoping, with the DCEU deal. But anyway, we're talking about Deadpool 2 today, and the news that David Leitch, one of the co-directors on John Wick, the first John Wick, we're going to clarify that in a moment, will be directing Deadpool 2. Now, the reasoning here on the surface, because this is happening at two levels, what they're telling you and what's actually happening on behind the scenes. But because everybody's so savvy these days, for the most part, we know what's happening on behind the scenes. So anyway, on the surface, John Wick, it's the same crossover audience, right? I mean, it's the same appeal, the same core demographic. We're impressed with John Wick that love Deadpool. But, that's not totally true, because you can see the difference in the box office numbers, right? Over $700 million worth of people liked Deadpool, and the first John Wick, somewhere, I believe off the top of my head, I don't recall exactly, but around 100 million, right? So that's ridiculous. I mean, obviously, they're very different pictures, and I think that John Wick, well, I thought that John Wick was a good film, and many did, it's no Deadpool, and that's why it didn't perform at the level of Deadpool. The action in the first Deadpool film that Tim Miller delivered was very, very important. And to in any way say that John Wick is capable of delivering, that team is capable of delivering similar action, that's a tough sell. Not to say they can't do it, but I would be surprised. Now, I was very encouraged by John Wick 2. I thought that trailer that came out at New York Comic Con was impressive, but it's worth noting that this director, David Leitch, left John Wick 2, so his partner on directing the first film is doing that as a solo run, so that David Leitch could go and make The Coldest City, which is a new Charlize Theron, James McAvoy spy film. So I think before we could really judge whether or not this is a good idea to have David Leitch direct Deadpool 2, we'd have to get a look at the trailer for The Coldest City. Of course, the people at Fox, I'm sure that David Leitch's agents have forwarded them at least a cut of Coldest City to help convince them that he's the guy for the job. And, would Fox hire someone? I don't know. Fox sometimes makes really smart decisions, and sometimes they make really bad decisions. So we don't know what's going to happen. Now, Leitch, on paper, he seems okay. John Wick, not bad. He's Brad Pitt's former stunt double turned director. He was the action coordinator on X-Men Origins Wolverine, so he already knows Ryan Reynolds. However, does anybody really remember the action in X-Men Origins Wolverine, right? It's not like they got the action coordinator from The Raid, or even most recently from The Accountant. That was fabulous. Actually, the stunt coordinator for The Accountant actually wrote a comment on my review for the movie, which I thought was so cool. That's why he comes to mind. But, those movies, the action really stood out. But I don't think anybody walked out of X-Men Origins. I think when you walked out of X-Men Origins Wolverine, you were talking more about when Hugh Jackman streaked across the movie rather than any great fight sequences. David Leitch was the second unit director on the Wolverine, this next Wolverine movie, also on Jurassic World and Captain America Civil War. That is an impressive resume. So perhaps he is growing as a filmmaker. Again, we need to see The Coldest City, but this is what's really discouraging about this. The reason that David Leitch is the frontrunner is because William Morris Endeavor, which represents Ryan Reynolds, wants one of their directors to direct the film. So, again, I don't understand. Deadpool 1 was so successful, and the reason it was successful is because everyone did what was best for the material, right? Even when it seemed like it was a bad idea, like the R rating, but everybody did what they thought was best for, again, for the material, and it worked out fabulously. So I don't understand why for a sequel they would change that. So, Tim Miller left because he wanted to up the action, he wanted to put more action sequences in, flashier action sequences, whereas Ryan Reynolds and the writers want to keep it cheap and scrappy, But again, John Wick is cheap and scrappy, and it didn't make anywhere near the money that Deadpool did. I think that Ryan Reynolds, while he brings a lot to the table as Deadpool, would be incorrect to assume that people are only paying to see him be funny in the role. They're paying also to see that amazing action. So that's problematic. And the fact that I don't want to get the best director, but the best director that works at William Morris Endeavor is also very discouraging. Now, to Ryan Reynolds' credit, word is that he's being pressured by William Morris Endeavor as well, just as Fox is. So he's not 100% on board with getting somebody else from Team WME. But that's the deal. And this is the way Hollywood often works these days. Agencies try to package for studios, get all their own talent in there, and that's also how they can get people to be represented by their agency. They say, well, if you're represented by William Morris Endeavor, we can put you into projects that we're packaging, like, do you want to be associated with the, Deadpool 3 going forward? That's how, you want to have a lot of, big franchises under your belt so that you can plug your talent in. And also that means that you get all the percentages of all the salaries associated with the movie. And also it gives you more power when negotiating with the studio, because WME can then say to Fox, well, we'll pull all our people, or because, we're in charge of all your talent. We are their representation. So it's not really good for anybody. Sometimes it works out, but a lot of times it doesn't. And so this is, I think personally, another discouraging development when it comes to Deadpool 2. But I hope we're all very happily surprised. Now here's a promising development. It was just announced today. Michael Fassbender said, I can say this, and that he's playing not one, but two robots or replicants in the next Alien movie, Alien Covenant. He's going to play David, as we all know from the first film, Prometheus, the best thing about Prometheus, in my opinion, and I think many people's opinions. I could have watched a whole movie of what he did by himself while everybody else was in hypersleep, right? When he was dyeing his hair and drinking milk and watching Lawrence of Arabia. I was like, well, this is genius. But anyway, he's going to be there playing David, but also another robot called Walter, who is a newer, more, according to Michael Fassbender, more humane version. I'd be like, in this upgrade, they're nicer and less murderous. And I'd be like, I think I need that upgrade. But apparently David can also fix himself when somebody rips his head off. But anyway, I wonder if Walter is the robot or android, who's with the new crew that comes across this planet where David is. That's the setup for Alien Covenant. I also wonder if they'll have some Parent Trap style shenanigans where, of course, since the two robots look the same, I would imagine, or look kind of similar, can they sub for each other, right? I'd be like, wow, we need to mess up our robot fast so that we can tell them apart. But anything that says more Michael Fassbender playing a robot, to me, is a huge selling point. They're like, it's just Michael Fassbender in the movie playing all the roles. And I think that I would even be more excited about that. So we'll see how that... Danny McBride is in this movie, which I also think is hilarious. So I'm excited. Even though Prometheus was so bad, to Ridley Scott's credit, he got me excited for Alien Covenant anyway. All right, so the third story of the day, this is actually the most important story of the day because I think that this could end up being something that's really big. So this is just starting to creep into the U.S. movie news, the movie trades, and so I want to put it on your radar as early as possible so you're ahead of the game. So there's a movie out in Japan, an anime movie called Your Name, and everyone's saying that the creator, Makoto Shinkai, is the next Miyazaki. Because Studio Ghibli, as we all know, is slowing down, really kind of making less films, if any films at all. And so it looks like that space needs to be filled. Nature abhors a vacuum, and Makoto Shinkai is filling it up. Now, he's been working for over a decade, but this seems to be his most commercial success. He, interestingly enough, said he had mixed feelings about that, saying, I've been making stuff for a long time. I don't know why everybody just likes it now, but who's gonna question success, right? Just be grateful for it. But Your Name, the name of, that's the movie, Your Name, it's a body-swapping romance about two teenagers who suddenly find themselves a boy and a girl in each other's bodies. And, all that would imply, but also there's some very metaphysical, environmental stuff about it too. City versus country living, etc. So it's a huge hit in Japan, the fifth highest grossing film of all time in Japan at $160 million so far. Actually, surpassing Ponyo already from Studio Ghibli. So Funimation has secured the U.S. release rights, and now they are very aggressively pushing this to be released before the end of the year for Oscar consideration at this year's Academy Awards. So I've put the trailer link down below, and I think, again, really keep an eye on this. This is going to get a strong push. I don't know if Funimation has what it takes to get an Oscar nomination, quite frankly. You know, when Miyazaki's films have done well during awards season, it's because Disney has pushed them. But let's see, this is such a huge hit. And it's such an odd film. I'd be curious to see, you know, as animation becomes such a strong category in the entertainment business, I'm looking for its awards, you know, the Best Feature Oscar to become more competitive instead of, you know, just giving it to the movie you've heard of the most or that the kids in your life seem to be the most excited about. I think that's the way animation voting has gone for the past couple, like I think actually ever since they created the category. And I would like to see it become as competitive as the other categories. So I think this is pretty exciting. But what's interesting to me about Your Name is that it really shows what it has such a different sensibility. I mean, it's not made to play, I think, beyond Japan, which is interesting. And I guess that makes sense because this filmmaker, this animator, has not had a lot of success prior to this. So he never imagined his film would have the chance to go global. So he's made something that's very much like Monster Hunt, very much like The Mermaid. And I saw The Mermaid, and I thought that was an interesting movie. I enjoyed it. But it's weird watching these movies because they have such a strong non-Western sensibility to them. They really are very much made for the Asian audience. And it's unusual to see that because those movies usually don't come here. And also, when somebody wants to make a film from those other regions that does well on a global scale, they usually make something that's, you know, geared towards the Western audience, or at least Western audience friendly. And these are not. This movie is not Western audience friendly. So I'm very curious to see if it does well here, both with audiences, you know, mainstream and, you know, the people who are hardcore anime fans, and how it does during awards season. And if, you know, as the Hollywood business becomes more global, will, you know, non-Western type films, you know, will we open up our minds as to what we're willing to watch as entertainment? I hope so. I'm curious to see this, and I'm just, anything that keeps 2D animation alive is good with me. So if anyone's seen Your Name, I'd be very curious down below to hear your thoughts on the film as well. All right, so those are the three stories of the day. The viewer question comes from Emmett O'Rourke, who has, I think, something that ties in very nicely to some of the things we've been discussing lately. So Emmett O'Rourke says, Grace, a question popped into my mind. You may have already mentioned this before, but I was wondering what was the exact method that is used to give a movie a rating, and how do films like Deadpool make sure they get an R rating and not an NC-17? Thanks, love the show. Thank you, Emmett. That's so nice of you to say. And I have kind of touched on this before, but I thought this was a good opportunity to just clarify it. So the MPAA ratings board is the one that decides what the rating is, right? And they have some rules, like you can have X number of swear words, like a number of you have mentioned who've seen Doctor Strange, that it has swear words in it, right? Like I think like 3 or maybe 2.5, like they almost, like you know what they're going to say, but they cut it off. And that's because, you know, I think for PG-13 you can have like 1 or 2 swear words. But you know, those rules can be bent because it's not decided by one person who's like checking off boxes. It's by a committee that sits there and, you know, is supposed to use their best judgment, right? But judgment is, you know, can be not only questioned but manipulated. So the way that this is done usually is that the movie Deadpool, Sausage Party has admitted to doing this. They will make something that is like far more raunchy than they're actually looking to do, that they know will never be approved by the MPAA. It's kind of like when you go into negotiations, right? For anything, and you ask for more than you want because you know you're going to have to come down. And just like when the person you're negotiating against offers less than they're prepared to give you because they know they're going to have to come up a little bit to meet you halfway. So that's the heart of negotiations. You end up meeting halfway, ideally, with a compromise that usually nobody's supposed to be entirely happy with. But the MPAA, maybe they like getting gifts, maybe they like talking to the studios, who knows. But I think more often than not, they let the studios get exactly what they wanted. And I think they get played a lot recently, and I think they would be a little bit more savvy about it. But then again, I don't know what's really in it for them to be savvy. I mean, everybody seems to be happy with the way this works, right? I don't see any big complaints about how movies are rated. Although I really do think Sausage Party should have been rated NC-17. Although to Sony's credit, Sony was really good at making sure everybody knew that it was an R-rated movie. And that's why I think there weren't any horrible surprises with people going to see the film. You know, whereas I think that Deadpool worked very hard to try and make people think that it was okay to take kids to see Deadpool. And I heard from a number of you that families were walking out of the film. Although, while they walked out of the film, I guess they felt it was uncool to do so and they were embarrassed, so they never really complained on a national scale. Like, everyone was like, my secret shame of walking out of Deadpool and not realizing it was inappropriate for children. Hilarious. But anyway, back to the MPAA. What's done is the studio will put in something, other directors have said this as well. They'll put in stuff that's way over the top, and then the MPAA will be like, that's going to be NC-17, and then the director and the studio go, okay, well, what if we cut this, and what if we cut that? And sometimes I think with Sausage Party, they were like, what if we just shave the genitals so that they don't have any hair on them, so it's less genital-like? And apparently the MPAA thinks that hairless genitals are rated R, but hairy genitals are NC-17. I know, it makes absolutely no sense. But that's the way it works. And they just sit down at the negotiating table and they say, well, what's it going to take to get us to an R? And that's the compromise. But again, it's a compromise that the studio and the directors always intended to do, and they end up getting everything they wanted. And I don't know why the MPAA, again, they're probably wise to it, hip to it, but again, what's in it for them to have a problem with it? So that's how it's done, and it's interesting to think about how the sliding scale works. Last night I watched Frankenstein, the 1931 version. So good, so compelling, so artfully done, so sophisticated. But they talked about how at that time that was a shocking film, because according to what had been able to be shown in cinemas prior to that. But today, it would be a G-rated movie, as they pointed out. So it's really interesting to see the sliding scale. And I think we are seeing a shift in what's considered R and what's considered NC-17, and that's because of the things that are available on the internet, etc. And I think I know you guys were going to argue about this, we always do, about what should be rated R in terms of nudity and in terms of violence, etc. But I do think it's important to protect childhood, and that kids should be kids for at least some time before they enter adulthood, and there are some things they should see and some things they shouldn't. And I think, of course, while they could find it on the internet, that's their parents' responsibility, but the MPAA also has a responsibility to let everybody know what they're at least getting into, right? So I think so far it's not a problem. I just don't like to see people manipulate the system. I mean, because then the system just seems stupid. All right, so anyway, that's the reasoning. And so I'm curious to see what you think, Emmett. What does everybody else think? And again, I think Deadpool was definitely an R-rated movie. I wouldn't say that should be rated NC-17. And I think that Sausage Party should have been rated NC-17, but I don't think it was a big problem. So what are your thoughts? I'd be curious to hear them down below. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Write down below, I think, today's top 3 stories, Emmett's viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions, of course, that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.